Hi again. Welcome back to the Quilty Life with Jenn Burt. Today we're going to continue our exploration of improv stack work to make traditional blocks. And the block we're going to tackle today is this guy. This is a traditional quilt block that is typically called a jewel star. I've actually made this block before in a way that gave perfectly perfect points. And the way that I did that was to use foundation paper piecing. This block could also be made pretty easily using English paper piecing, where you have all your little pieces of paper and you wrap the fabric around it and then sew the pieces together by hand. You could also do this with templates or some other very traditional method. All the methods I just discussed would give you these perfectly pointy points and everything would look perfect, but it would also be a little bit fussy. In my opinion, that's what makes this block the perfect candidate for improv stack work, because we can get the look and feel of this block without any of the fussy drama. So let's get started. Remember that for stack work, you have to look at the block and determine how many different fabrics are used. In this case, I have printed this out in grayscale so we don't get overly concerned with the colors, because we're going to mix our colors up, of course. So we can see that there's this white on the outside, so that's one fabric. And then there's this light gray. That's the second fabric. And then we have this dark gray, which gives us the third fabric. So this is a 3 fabric block. So if you recall, that means that we want to start with 3 chunks of fabric that we are going to stack up and cut. I've decided to use these fabrics for this block. It's a really dark orange, a sort of creamy white, and a golden-y kind of yellow. And I really think they're going to look nice together in this particular block. And through the magic of YouTube, we have our squares of fabric. So I have a square of each of the 3 fabrics that I selected. Now, what we need to discuss is why I cut the squares of fabric this particular size. They are 10 inches by 10 inches. And I decided on that size because I want my final blocks to end up to be around 6.5 by 6.5 inches square. But remember, when we cut these out, there's seam allowances, and so things are going to shrink in. So we have to decide how much bigger than 6.5 inches we need to cut this to make it all work. So to figure that out, let's look at the actual block. And we can see right here, there's a lot of seams. Look for the place going across where you have the most number of seams. And this is about where that happens. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At each of these seams, we're going to lose 1/4 of an inch off each side. So that means total of 1/2 inch is lost for each seam. So there's 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. So I'm going to lose around 3 inches from the seam allowances. And the same thing's going to happen this way. So that means if I want the block to end up being 6.5 inches wide, I need to do 6.5 plus 3, which is 9.5. And then I just gave it a little extra wiggle room and rounded up to 10 inches square. So let's start cutting. Remember that when we're doing stack work, we have our pile of fabric and we're going to cut all of them in exactly the same way. Then we're going to take all of our fabrics and we're going to mix them up and turn them into 3 different blocks that are this layout, but with different fabric combinations. So anytime that we're going to do stack work, the first cut that we need to make has to be one of the seam lines that goes from one side of the block all the way to the other. For example, this one that goes from corner to corner, or this one that goes from this corner to that corner. So let's do this one here, which means we need to cut this whole stack in half from corner to corner. And I am using my ruler in this case, but you could totally do this free-handed if you wanted to. You also don't have to be so precise and go from corner to corner. It could be a little bit off one way or the other. So precision is definitely not required here. And if you want it to look wonkier, try to cut it a little off. Okay, so let's cut from corner to corner. And now, without moving anything, we're going to do the other one, going in the other direction. And now we look at our drawing and we can see that those two really are the only ones that go from side to side. So now we need to separate these out, and we're going to cut each of these triangles separately. So this is right here. This is going to be this triangle. And so we can see that there are two lines that go from this edge to this edge and this edge to that edge, forming a sort of X right there. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to lay my ruler on here, and then I sort of look at my picture and say, okay, it's about that far from there. Maybe I want to go a little farther over. And then it's about halfway down this side, which that looks about right. So I'm happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. And then without moving any of this, I'm going to turn the ruler the other way, and I'm going to make a cut from here to here. And now, as you can see, we have all four of those pieces. Now, all we have to do is repeat this exact same process for each of the other three triangles. And there we go. It is all cut. We have cut all of our seam lines, and I sort of pulled them apart so you can see that it exactly matches up with this. And doesn't it look so cool? Now it's time to do some mixing, so let's get out the lunch trays. All right, our lunch trays are ready to go, and now let's start mixing up our fabrics. So let's build all three blocks at the same time. On this one, let's make these outside triangle pieces white. And then on this one, let's make all the outside triangles yellow. And of course, that means that the orange ones are going to go on this one. Okay, next, let's think about where the dark gray pieces are going to go. It's these right here. And we already used white here, so we need to use the whites in one of the other blocks. Let's go with the yellow one. There we go. And now let's put the yellow ones up here. And of course, that means the orange ones go up here. And now finally, we're going to drop the light gray pieces in. In this case, the whites are on top. This is the only one that we haven't used the creamy white, so we'll put it on that one. And the yellow goes over here. And you guessed it, orange goes over here. And that's it. So we've mixed up all the fabrics, and we've got our three blocks laid out on our lunch trays, which, remember, just lets us pick this up, carry it to our sewing machine, carry it over to the ironing board, back over here without the pieces getting out of order. Now, in this case, there's a lot of pieces, and a lot of them look really similar, and we've used all solids. So it's quite easy to accidentally flip one over or maybe get one in the wrong place. So keeping them all sort of organized will save you a lot of headaches down the road. So let's sew this one together. Now you may be looking at this and thinking, I don't even know where to start on this. How do I sew this thing together? And remember, when you're doing stack work, if you're ever stuck, just think, I want to sew it together in the opposite order that I cut it. So in this case, remember the last thing that we did, we already had these out here in sort of triangles. And the last thing that we did was to cut those X's. So we need to reconstruct those X's, basically. In this case, each of those cross through things, so it's not as straightforward as things that have less cuts. But thinking of it that way did help us separate everything out and think it's going to be somewhere along here is where I need to sew. So there's a lot of ways that you could do this, but here's how I'm going to approach it. I am going to sew these two pieces together, and then these two pieces together. And then that'll give me two pieces here that I can sew together. And I'm going to do that for each side. So I'm going to sew, in each case, the orange to the yellow, and then this yellow to the white, and then I'll sew each of those together. Let's sew some of these seams so you can see what I mean. I've sewn the seams for here, 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 and here. So let's think about pressing now. Let's tackle this one first. In this case, I'm just going to press to the darker fabric. Same thing on this side. I'm going to press to this darker fabric. It goes in this orientation. So I pressed this one this way, and then by pressing this one this way, I know that no matter how I sew these together, I'm not going to have all the bulk on one side. So I'm going to take those over to the ironing board and press them. I'm going to repeat the same process on this side, but this time note that the yellows It's a mirror of this. The yellows are actually the ones down here like this. If I press towards the dark fabric, it's going to go up towards that and up towards that. So I can either say that's not going to be a problem, or I could press seams open, or I could switch the direction that I do one or the other. This one is a lot darker than this one. And you can see I kind of didn't sew very straight. So if I wanted to press towards it this way, I would have to come in here and cut some of that off first. So just to avoid all of that, I'm just going to press this one towards the dark side. And now when I'm looking at this, I'm going to say, okay, well, this is less dramatically different in color. So I'm less likely to see that shadowing through. I did sew a little off right there. So I will cut that off just to avoid shadowing through. And then I'll end up on this side pressing towards the lighter one. There we go. So the seam goes up this way and down that way. Again, you could just press the seams open and avoid all of this drama. So if you like pressing your seams open, this is a really good place to do it. I'm going to go iron those. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing for these two triangles. So now we've got the inside seams on each of the triangles done. So now we need to just sew the triangles together. So to do that, let's straighten up the edges first. So I'm going to do this freehand, and what I need to do, this is bigger than this. So I need to make this line straight. So I could do this with a ruler, but I'm going to do it freehand, and I could just go in here and cut. But I have to aim very precisely to get it to where I want it to go. So instead, I'm going to flip it over this way. So the part that I don't want to cut is closer to me, and the part I want to cut is farther away from me. This allows me to cut a straighter line without as much drama and without the chance that the line's going to be crooked. So I just set my rotary cutter right next to the line I want to cut and just extend it up. And that's it. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I want to cut this. So again, I flip it over and then cut and extend that line up. And I'll do that for all the other triangles. And now these will sew together nicely. So for this one, I'm going to line this up like this and flip it over to here. Now notice this edge is longer than the other. So you can slide it one way or the other if you want to, or you can just try to center it up as good as you can, which is what I'm going to do here. And you don't have to worry if your points are perfectly pointy. It's going to be almost impossible to do it on everything anyway. So if you want to, you can try to make them really off. So that way it looks like a design choice and not a mistake, right? You're doing this wonkiness on purpose, so you might as well lean into it. But for now, I'm just going to center this up as well as I can, and we'll see what happens after I sew it. We'll see if I get a pointy point accidentally or not. Okay, moment of truth. Let's see what happened. And look at that. I did it without even trying. So that's a pretty perfect looking point right there. Yay for me, if that's what I was shooting for. So notice I just pressed that with my seam roller, and there is quite a lot of bulk right there because everything's going towards that. So in this particular case, I'm going to come back in here with my fingers, and I'm going to press this seam allowance open. That just keeps it all from getting all bunched up right here in that one spot. So pressing this one open gives me less bulk overall. This is a common thing that I do in both traditional quilting and improv quilting. I will pick the method of least resistance when it comes to pressing seams. I tend to press to the dark side, but if I realize it's going to get lumpy, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to press my seams open. And that's what's going to happen here. So I took that over to my ironing board, and while it was on my ironing board, I sat my little tailor's clapper on those seams just to make sure that this all gets nice and locked in and gets it as flat as possible so I can avoid issues later. So now that we've got this first triangle done, let's repeat the process for the other three. So my next step is going to be to sew these two together and those two together. So, like you might expect, we're going to straighten up each of those edges and then sew one side to the other. So those are done, and now I'm going to press these seams open as well. And now the last seam, we just need to put the two halves together. So again, we'll straighten this up and then sew them together. Let's talk about straightening in this case. So let's look at this one. It is quite wavy. So I'm going to come in here with a ruler and I am going to put it at each of the points and see what happens. And in this case, if I go from point to point, that will actually work. Sometimes this might dip in too far, so you might need to slide it in one direction or the other. But the goal here is to cut off the least amount of fabric possible while still getting a straight line. And this is the alignment in this particular case that does that for us. So let's take a look at this side. We lay our ruler on here and we try to do the tip to tip thing. And this is one of those cases where maybe you can't see it, but this dips in too far and we would end up having a notch. Same thing here. So what we need to do is figure out where we can cut so we get a straight line and cut off the least amount of fabric possible. And I think what I'm going to do is start at this tip. I'll run close to that and close to that. And so this will be our line this way. I could have gone from this tip over that way as well. You can just make the decision based on your preference. And now they will sew together nicely. Maybe slide it around and think, well, maybe if I match those up, that might look nice. And then see, these are both up tall. So you can sort of play around with this. Don't try to just immediately think, I need that middle to match. If you were doing this traditionally, you'd probably be focusing on that a lot. But since everything's already a little wonky, you can sort of slide it around and see what might look better. And I sort of like it about right there. So I'm going to flip this on top of that and sew them together so I get that look. And so like our other seams, this is going to get quite bulky if we push to one side. So we're going to press that seam open too. So as usual, after I got that nice and flat, and look how lovely all those seams are. After I got that nice and flat over on my ironing board, I put my big tailor's clapper on there and let it sit there for about 30 seconds to make sure it gets nice and super flat for me. And now the final step is to trim this bad boy up. Now remember, whenever we cut all of these out, we didn't take any seam allowances into account. That's why we end up with stuff that sticks off too far. So this is on purpose. Don't think you did something wrong that it ended up like this, because this is how stack work ends up looking. So if you needed this to be a very precise size, you could at this point come in with a ruler that is the size that you want it to be, or you could use some other type of method to get this to be the exact size that you want it to be. But I'm not super concerned that these are perfectly square. So what I'm going to do is come in here with my ruler and I'm going to find a straight edge that's pretty far in. In this case, the whites are the farthest in on each side. So I'm going to use the straight side of the white to decide where I'm going to cut. And I'm going to repeat that on the other three sides. And all done. So as you can see, this turned out to be a little shorter on this side than this side, but this might turn out looking super cool, because if you make another one that's shorter on this side and longer on that side and you sew them together, it's going to give a really fun wonky look. You could come back in here and cut that off straighter later if you wanted to, but I just like to preserve as much as I can of what I've made, and then I can make decisions later about what I want to or need to cut off. So let's compare this to our initial picture. So you can see there's a lot of similarities, but there's some differences. These are not making this perfectly perfect shape here in the middle, but the overall look and feel of this is the same. So I'm now going to sew these together in exactly the same way. And just like that, we have 3 completed jewel star blocks. So as you can see, when you put these two together, this triangle here is a lot bigger than this one. But if we turn it around and put it with, say, this one, those match up a little better. So when you put these together, that might be a consideration that you take into account. Then again, maybe that's not what you're worried about. Maybe when you do yours, you want to make sure that these things come to an exact point, and that these colors match up in a way that pleases you. Or you can do a combination of all different kinds of things when you lay these out. So because they're wonky, you're going to have a lot of different options for how you can put these together. So stack work just gives you a nice scrappiness that you don't really have to think about. It mixes everything up for you, and you can then have a lot of things to play with. So the next thing that you could do is go back and get another stack of the exact same 3 fabrics, cut them up, and then sew them together. And then repeat that again and again until you have enough blocks. The other thing that you could do is to take 3 completely different fabrics, cut them the same way, and then sew them together and repeat until you have enough blocks to get you a super scrappy looking thing. The other thing you could do is to use one color that's the same. For example, what if you really like this orange? So you make sure that there's an orange in every stack, and then every block has that color, and that pulls everything through. And of course, you could just stop here, and then you can use them in any way that you want to. So as you can see, stack work is super, super flexible. It gives you lots of ways to work, and it lets you create the look and feel of a very complicated block, but without all the fussiness that would be involved in using FPP, EPP, templates, or other traditional kind of methods. I hope you'll give it a shot because stack work is a lot of fun, and honestly, the more complicated the block is, the more exciting it is to try to stick it all back together after you cut it up. I'll see you back here next time for another episode of The Quilty Life with me, Jenn George Burt.